Big D has the hugest boner for The Leftovers I've ever seen a man have over a TV show. So, look, Greg, like, hear us out, man. We're not saying it's in the same echelon.
Welcome back to Shat on TV American Gods Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece for the hit Starz series American Gods. I'm one of your hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me is Gene Lyons.
Are you still my puppy?
And this is our fan email episode where we look back on this week's episode of American Gods and provide our feedback on the top listener emails for the week in a little episode we call the American Gods Confessional. Again, this week's episode was entitled Lemon Scented You. You spent just about an hour listening to our ideas on Tuesday's Deep Dive. Now it's our turn to hear from you. Gene, you know, the emails continue to get better each week, and it's not just the emails we're getting. The amount of DMs and Twitter, is it called @?
You're the resident Twitter expert on this podcast, so if you don't know, I certainly don't know.
But people are messaging us everywhere on social media, and they're really getting involved, and I'm really liking this fan interaction.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It is a rarity. Raj and I rarely agree on anything, and we pretty much unanimously chose these 5 emails to hosts at shatontv.com as pretty much like shining examples of exactly the kind of stuff that people want to hear. They want to know more about the characters, more about what's going on with the plot, and then just some really, really strong opinions that are backed up with some facts. It's a great batch.
Not only that, but I woke up to a direct message from Coach Marcus, who's one of our listeners. And one thing we did need help on, and I'm glad, Coach, it came from you and not another one of those snarky people on Twitter. But he gave us he broke down how to say the God that we see in the opening sequence, the Coming to America vignette.
Oh, so you mean our Nunyunnini? It wasn't right?
Apparently not.
So Nunyunnini. Thank you, Coach Marcus.
Nunyunnini. That's right. So for all those people out there, Nunyunnini. And there's actually some really good emails that kind of go in depth of that God and everything like that. So thank you, everyone who wrote in. If this is your first time listening to American Gods Confessional by Shat on TV, here's how this goes. We take the top email from our listeners, and we read and respond to them. If you want to join the conversation, we post all of our emails in their raw and unedited versions on our website, shatontv.com. Click on the American Gods Confessional. There's a comment box on each of them. You can write in if you like anything that you hear, or maybe on next episode. Again, as Gene pointed out, that email address is hosts at shatontv. Now, because there were such great emails, some of them were long, some of them had duplicate information, so we truncated them for content and space. But again, go to our website and you can see them all in their full and glorious natures. With that being said, Gene, why don't we open up this week's confessional booth and dive right in.
Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem.
Okay, our first email comes in from Jackson. He writes, hello, here are my notes on the episode Mr. World. He is a new god of globalization, interaction, and totalitarianism, and he's the leader of the new gods. Think of it like this. You know how people believe there is a shadow government, spooks, or Men in Black, or Big Brother? That's exactly what Mr. World represents. The tree in the police department was an associate of Mr. World called Mr. Wood. Mr. Wood is part of Mr. World's Spooks team, which consists of Mr. Stone, Mr. Town, and Mr. Rhodes. The Spooks is the belief that there is a secret shadow, shady part of the government that watches everything that you do. And again, this comes from, I think this is a first-time email from Jackson. So thanks, Jackson, for writing in. And what do you think about this idea that the Mr. Wood is part of Mr. World's Spooks team?
Yeah, I mean, being a reader of the book and a purist on Neil Gaiman, one of the things that I noticed about this episode was that the police were involved rather than the spooks that we see in the book. And so I never put 2 and 2 together. I'm so glad Jackson wrote it, because this is absolutely, I think, right on point, where there are these agents of Mr. World that we see in the book we had not seen in the show. And I think that that's a much more probable explanation than what we offered, which was essentially that this was the world tree reaching out to Shadow. Again, we haven't gotten clear indication from the show either way, but this seems more plausible because considering that Mr. Wednesday did not seem happy about it either, and they had to escape. It didn't seem to be helping either of them, and it coincided with Mr. World showing up. So I think that Mr. Wood, that makes sense.
Now, is this would you label this a book spoiler?
I don't know that it's a book spoiler because, again, we were talking with Big D about this earlier this week in that at this point, it's hard to say if there even are spoilers because the show is taking so many liberties and it's kind of off in its own trajectory, and it's going to be going for several seasons. So we're going to see a lot of stuff that we did not see in the book, a lot of different interpretations. And so we're really no more ahead than anybody else. In fact, a person who has a working knowledge of show writing or mythology might have a leg up on people who have read the book. So I would say that I wouldn't consider it a spoiler.
Yeah, and there's actually a really good email that I think Jez Bell wrote in where she kind of breaks down her idea of what the police tree is. I won't spoil that for you. I think go to our website and see that here. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, again, if you're a reader of the book, you might know who the spooks are. They did not appear as kind of like what they look like or their namesake. They didn't appear in the book as their namesake. So it wasn't like a wood, and I don't know what they would do for a town or a road here, which is why that would be my only, I guess, pushback on this idea that the Wood was in cahoots with Mr. World is because how are you going to, if that's truly the case, how are you going to represent a town and a road? Is that just, are Shadow and Wednesday going to be driving down the road and then the road's going to attack them?
They're probably just going to be represented by giant boners.
See, I would actually watch that. I mean, in fact, one could argue that Technical Boy's children, that's what it were. They were just giant penises.
I thought they were just failed backup dancers for Lady Gaga.
Jackson, thank you so much for writing in. We really appreciate it. The next American Gods Confessional comes in from Mark. Mark writes in, "Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for keeping the podcast interesting and funny. This week's podcast covered most of my thoughts on Laura, Mad Sweeney, and Shadow, so I will only hit on minor thoughts. I don't think that the intro was about God warfare, but basically that of its transmission through humans. Their priest died as they entered the new territory, and at the time, the immigrants were faced with an opportunity to assimilate or die, and they chose to keep their beliefs and were massacred, taking the more malleable ones in the society and assimilating them into their culture and God. It's the same idea as Christian missionaries spreading the gospel all over the world. They come into contact with a spiritual system passed on through oral history and starts preaching from their scrolls and currently books of their God. Our God is better. We have it on paper and pictures. In that, the spiritual system started to lose market share to the Judeo-Christian God. And as time passes, as the old system is forgotten, they die." Now, I do have to preface this before I read this next part that he actually went through all the characters that we did see and gave very thorough breakdowns of his analysis. The only one that we're going to talk about here is Mr. Wednesday, but I do recommend you going to Mark's email there on Shat on TV in the American Gods Confessional. Read it. But anyway, he writes about Mr. Wednesday and Odin, which I really liked here. "The process by which the show currently introduced gods that are living in America is that, number one, they need current worship to be remembered, and two, sacrifices are made to them. In the case of Mr. Wednesday, he is the gallows god. The world tree started to grow in the police station to claim the dead cops, and the cops which were entering the police station and most likely died, they were current sacrifices or nourishment to Mr. Wednesday. The offer for which Mr. World offered him was the missile which bears his name and will direct the missile to hit North Korea, claiming millions of lives. So basically, millions would be sacrificed in Odin's name, again, the gallows god. This is the strange thing. He turned down the million of sacrifices for his current plight of being a simple trickster. As shown in the last few episodes, the ravens are in the vicinity. They were knocking on Mr. Wednesday's chamber door, but did not say nevermore. Instead, the raven shows up and conveys a message to his boss, and off goes Mr. Wednesday to go to Shadow's room, who actually smells the corpse currently known as Laura. Now, at this point, it is unknown if the bird told him about Laura or even the cops, but it did have information, and with that info, Mr. Wednesday was trying to coax Shadow away from the situation. My question is, what game is Odin running which would allow him to bypass that many sacrifices? Thanks again, and this comes from American Gollum, also known as Mark. I guess that's his pen name.
So I think we get a clue from Mr. Wednesday when he's talking to the cops. It's something I mentioned on the deep dive too. He quotes the ruffian on the stairs, right? Which is this rhyme essentially talking about death being the ruffian on the stairs, right? He is playing a much weaker character than he actually is, in the sense that Mr. Wednesday himself is not revealing the true extent of his powers. And also he is recruiting gods that do make the new gods nervous. That's why he's going after Chernobog, right? A god of death. And so, or a god of war, if you look at it that way. So essentially what you're seeing here is it's not necessarily that he isn't tempted by these offerings, but he has a bigger game. You remember, his strength is that he is a con artist. He's a trickster, right? And so in that sense, it's a great question. What is he up to? And I think we'll see that as the show carries on. But just remember that he's leaving little hints here and there that he is not displaying the true extent of his power.
One thing that you talked about in terms of the poem here, and I think we made the analogy, or we made the comparison a couple episodes ago, is Breaking Bad. So are you basically saying that this poem is the equivalent of Walter White going to his wife, "I'm the one that knocks"?
No. I mean, I'm the one that knocks is a pretty big show of force. That's an overstatement of confidence to say that this is the opposite. Basically, he's saying, don't look at my old body, shabby clothing, and groveling nature as it's a much more subtle hint, right? He's not saying that I'm the big bad, but rather that, death is the ruffian on the stairs. I am, that's me.
The other idea that American Golem Mark writes in here is that the idea that the gallows god would have this tree, and we've seen this tree and other bits and pieces of the show, is he suggesting here that the tree was all a ruse to misdirect us from the new gods, and that was actually Mr. Wednesday who brought up the tree and killed all those people?
I think that's what he's suggesting. I don't know that I buy it, again, only because of the fact that you see Shadow and Mr. Wednesday flee from the tree, which doesn't seem, if it's something that you conjured yourself, it doesn't seem likely that you're fleeing it. Of course, unless you're trying to, do that under the guise of not being in control of it. It doesn't quite add up to me, but I like that there are these different ideas, and I think Jezebel, like you mentioned, has even more ideas on what this represents. So whether it's Mr. Wood, or if it's the world tree being conjured up by Odin, or by Mr. Wednesday, there are different explanations to it. I'm excited to see how it actually turns out.
And the other thing that he points out here is kind of what we talked about on the deep dive, which is the idea of how Christianity or religions were spread. It's like what Eddie Izzard said about how the British captured their giant empire in the beginning when they would arrive at, nations, and, the native people would greet them on the land, and they'd be like, "Well, we claim this land for England." And the native people would go, "What are you talking about? We lived here for generations, for thousands of years." He's like, "Well, do you have a flag?" Christianity was spread through missionaries who basically said, "Oh, did you write down all your stuff? Because we got a book right here for you."
Yeah, and actually, you referenced Eddie Izzard because you're old as fuck, but actually, Trevor Noah does an even better version of that. I encourage everyone to check it out, about basically civilization.
I can't believe you just knocked my Eddie Izzard reference.
Trevor Noah, man.
Thanks so much for writing in, American Golem. The next American Gods Confessional does come in from Jezebel, and again, we did truncate it for space here, but she writes in, "Hi guys, wow, absolutely loved your podcast this week. You guys were on top of it, and it was amazing. Gene even totally got into the hippy-dippy numerology thing. Welcome to the dark side, my friend. I love the idea of the speed limit. It's a journey for Shadow, and only so fast he can go. I really love the Nunyunnini story, and I went back to the book to ensure I got all of it. The visual effects were gorgeous, and it also made me wish every Coming to America was done in the same way. What I took away from the story is that Atsula, who was the mammoth priestess, suffered to bring her people to a new land. Her faith, and hence her God, helped her through this. The journey, however, took its toll, and she succumbed to the spirit of the land, also represented here as the buffalo, or she possibly sacrificed herself, as the story goes. The interesting part is that the elders keep their faith and refuse to accept what the land has to offer, therefore they die. The children, however, understand the tangible. They believe what they can see. The land can feed them. Nunyunnini suffers extinction along with the mammoth, and the children thrive in the post-Ice Age. The extinction of a god is a very important point, but also the children. Technical Boy's minions are also called children. Is this coincidence? There is so much to dive into here about how our children are susceptible to immediate gratification. Media and technology fuel that. Their messages are engineered for maximum devotion. Now, I searched high and low for Easter eggs this week, and I found myself really wanting. I will post whatever I find tomorrow, and that's all I have to say about that. XO, Jez, P.S., thank you for all the love. I love you back, XO.
Jez, I've got an Easter egg for you. So Tom, or as you call him, Tommy, sent me a direct message and pointed out, you guys are going to love this. So I was going on about 55 of what it could mean. Tom pointed out that on page 55 of American Gods is the hotel or the motel room scene between Shadow Moon and Laura Moon.
Yeah, I think this was tweeted out by Brian Fuller earlier today, and he said the exact same thing. Now, my question to that was, well, which edition are we reading here? Are we reading the paperback? Are we reading the hardcover? Are we reading the 10th anniversary? Apparently, it came from the 10th anniversary paperback edition.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I have, and it matches up. So
okay, yeah. So that is a nice little Easter egg here. And I got to be quite honest, I was a little disappointed when I heard that because I felt like yours was a little bit more in depth. Like for a show that's trying to be on a deeper level, try to be a little meta with the whole Ziggy Stardust and the advertisement to sell this idea to Mr. Wednesday by using cartoons and bright lights and sex, which is how media hands us stuff these days. For them to just to say, well, it was on page 55 of the book, I think is a little, it's a little soft in my opinion.
Well, it's cute. It's a nod to the reader. I thought it was pretty neat. I mean, obviously, I'm always going to like my explanation of anything better than reality, but that's, whatever. That's neither here nor there. Now, with regards to the youth and the instant gratification idea, I was listening to a debate once that was talking about whether or not we should extend human life, which is to say, are our lifespans long enough? Or if it's medically possible, should we make them longer? Is there a reason that we die when we do? And I thought, well, this is a simple debate. Of course you should make life longer. Like, who wants to die? But one of the points that they made on it was, imagine if people who were alive in the 18th century were still alive now and they could still vote. Would slavery still exist? Would there be interracial marriage? Would you be able to have gay marriage? And so in essence, the dying out of the old allows the young and more open-minded to advance further. So these kids, you see them, they adapt very quickly. The older people don't. And it's a very interesting argument for the wisdom of nature in allowing us to die and allowing the next generation to kind of take over and improve upon our failures. So in that sense, I think it's a really great observation that the kids are able to adapt very quickly and carry on, embrace a new God, and thrive.
That's an interesting point. So what you're saying is if the Democrats want to win Texas or Florida, they've just got to wait a couple years and people will die off. I
mean, really, I do think that, for you and I mean, being super liberals as we are, I think that, people say all the time there's the trope of being on the right side of history. I think that there is, that's the faith that I carry, is like, if I just got to be patient, it'll happen.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Jez, thank you so much for writing in. And one of the things that we do want to announce here is we are in talks with having Jez Bell. She has a great blog that you should definitely check out. We promote it almost weekly here. But Jez Bell is open to the idea of having a Jez's Corner on shadontv.com. And I think that would be great.
No, that'd be awesome. Jez is super talented. She deserves more traffic to her blog, and I'd be happy to help her out with that, as she can help us out. And she has been helping us out for a year now on all of our podcasts. Absolutely.
Jez, thanks so much. You can follow her at Jezzy Bell on Twitter. The next American Gods confessional comes in from Mindy. Mindy writes in, Mr. World's Endgame. Mr. World is like a monotheistic god with different manifestations still creating worship to the one. To create a new lemon-scented Odin is to envelop the power and worshippers of Odin into the one god, or Mr. World. If Odin is forgotten, Mr. World potentially misses out on worshippers and power, but rebranding Odin into a new manifestation of Mr. World creates more power for him. This also gives some insight as to why media could overtake and use Technical Boy's technology. She may not necessarily be more powerful, she just has access to his abilities as a shape-shifting manifestation of the one god. And again, this comes from Mindy. What do you think of this idea?
So this feeds very nicely into our opening email regarding the nature of Mr. World. And in that one, we were talking about, about this government, the Big Brother idea, but it really is this notion that you have the accumulation of all data, all thought, all belief, all observation is feeding into this Mr. World. And yeah, the reason why he wants Wednesday around is because he wants Wednesday as a part of him. And this makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't be surprised if, and we see that a bit with media, if there's a more close relationship between the closer you are to Mr. World and the more power he has over you. He doesn't seem like the type who is going to necessarily strong arm people into things, but rather make them deals. He seems like that kind of guy, almost like an opposite side of the coin from Mr. Wednesday.
Let me ask you this question. This may be this may not be the right venue to even ask this question, but do you feel like there ever should be or will be one true religion across the world?
Well, I was raised actually believing in something called progressive revelation. So it was basically the idea that there only is one true religion, but people have just made distinctions. Like basically that you had all these prophets that all represented one religion. And then people just made a confusion and thought that they were supposed to be these different religions, but they were all the same teaching sort of thing. Again, do I believe it? No. I mean, me, I'm an individualist. I do believe in science, I guess, if that would be a god of sorts, but science in its nature, people say, oh, you believe in science, I believe in, Christianity, and, it's the same thing, right? Like you believe in your thing, I believe in my thing. Well, no, science is very happy to say, we were wrong. And, the evidence points to, I mean, that's the cool thing about scientists. They'll be like, we absolutely know this for sure. But when evidence emerges that says that's wrong, they're happy to drop it and move on to the next thing, So, again, I'm not down with the one God.
Do you think that would be a hindrance to humanity overall if we only believed in one thing?
Well, no. I mean, if we all believed in the Constitution, it'd be badass.
No, but what I mean by that is like one religion. If one religion could truly rule all humans, wouldn't that be bad for humanity?
I don't think so. I think it'd be pretty awesome. I mean, first of all, you wouldn't have holy wars, so that'd be good. And then also you would have like a foundation for a universal form of ethics and morality. I think that would make a lot of sense. That doesn't necessarily mean that it should have a political body that governs it. I mean, something to the effect of like if the Vatican were to control everything, I think that would be frightening. And there should certainly be a separation of church and state.
But don't you think that's kind of the idea of Mr. World? Is the idea that he's going to get all the gods on his side. And by that, he will be able to distract and occupy everyone else's time because they'll all worship to him with no other sands in the oyster, so to speak, no one to be a thorn in his side. He'll be able to control the masses. And that's my fear with organized religion. Number one, even though I grew up Catholic, most Catholics today, especially with our new badass Pope, who I think is also Batman, most of us have critical thinking skills. But the idea that I think if you had one true religion, I think it would hindrance people's creativity. People would no longer ask questions. And I think that's the danger of having one true God that Mr. World is trying to do, right? If you distract the people to enough to where they don't know that they're being led like sheep, then you truly will wield the power.
I think it's two different questions, though, because by that implication, you're saying that by having multiple religions that are at odds, that somehow advances the human agenda? I don't think so.
No, what I'm saying here is that people should be able to have their own religions. People should be able to believe and worship the way that they want. The whole, you talk about the Constitution, that whole freedom of religion thing, pretty kind of badass, right? That whole separation of state, completely believe in that. You combine those two, it allows the ability for people to have freedom. Now, once you start imposing someone's, my belief over yours and me thinking you're a bad person because you don't believe the way that I believe, I think is kind of a naughty idea. I think that's kind of terrible. And that leads to, situations with the land bridge in the 1400s.
That's a totally different notion, though. You're asking, what would it be like if we had one true religion? No, what you're asking is, would it be okay if one religion was forced on everybody? Of course not.
Well, isn't that kind of what Mr. World is doing here?
No, Mr. World's not trying to force a religion on somebody.
He's saying, listen, if you don't believe in me, if I don't have connections to you, North Korea, it's disconnected from this global capitalistic society. They're the last remaining people. I'm going to sacrifice Odin. Odin is also a big situation here. I'm going to get him on my side by offering up these 24.9 million people so I can get him on my team and the last remaining rebels out there on Yavin 4, the moon base of Yavin 4, they're going to be wiped off of history. Like, I don't need them anymore.
Next email. Jesus.
Thanks so much, Mindy, for writing in. Our last and final email confessional comes in from Coach Marcus himself. He says, "Greeting, fellas. A great episode down. This is the episode where people will get it. If you still have questions about Neil Gaiman's world after this episode, then in my humble opinion, you're just not paying attention. The Shadow and Laura conversation was awesome. In the book, I don't think Laura was as emotional as she portrayed on the show. She answers Shadow's questions about why she cheated and what happened, but when she died, it was more matter of fact, not emotional. Now, Laura versus Mad Sweeney, great back and forth between these two. The scene was not in the book, but it gives Sweeney a lot more context about the coin. The book never really fully explains that Sweeney can't take the coin, it has to be given to him. This puts a lot of things in perspective. Wednesday versus Mr. World. This is the scene that brings Gaiman's world together. This scene is not in the book, but again, I think it's necessary for show viewers. The perfectly portrayed plot of the show, Mr. World doesn't appear too often in the book, but he is talked about enough to know that he is important. And finally, media versus the show. Every time Gillian Anderson is on screen, she steals it. I hope they don't overuse her. Anyway, I can't wait to hear the cast. Deuces, and this comes from Coach Marcus.
Coach Marcus, I think they've already overused her. I love the Bowie thing, but man, I love Lucy, Marilyn Monroe. It's getting a little much. It's getting a lot of screen time, a lot of close-ups. It makes me kind of uncomfortable. With regards to Mr. Wednesday and Mr. World, thought it was a good scene, but honestly, with the way they were going to use Crispin Glover, I thought he'd be more in the shadows throughout the show. I kind of like the way that the book made passing allusions to him, but if that truly is what he is, a big brother, or in a world of spooks, if he represents the deep government or like some sort of Illuminati thing, I would really appreciate him actually being kind of in the shadows more. But that being said, I thought it was a good scene.
They've gone off book now here, 2 episodes in a row. You were not necessarily a big fan of episode 4 because of the potty humor, so to speak, but you really enjoyed episode 5. Do you think that you're going to draw more enjoyment out of them going more off book and taking more liberties with the story, or based on what we've seen so far, you appreciate the them sticking more towards the book itself, like we saw in episodes 1 through 3? What do you want to see more?
It's an interesting question because Jezebel and I both are on the same page where we're only watching this because Neil Gaiman wrote it. And I feel like if I hadn't read the book, if it didn't have his name on it, I wouldn't be watching this at all. So in that sense, I don't, I'd have to say that, it needs to stick to the book. On the other hand, I see what they're doing with it, and it's a little more, if they're going to go off book, they need to explain some things in a different way. So I appreciate what they're doing here. I think it's a mischaracterization to say I really enjoyed episode 5. I thought episode 5 was an improvement over 4, but, again, as other people have written in, somehow mistaking my comments, saying that that this is as good as The Wire or Westworld. It's not, and I don't think anybody's saying it is necessarily. I would say that again, I'm waiting to see what they do with it, because it's definitely not the book. I mean, the book was fodder for like imagine this book, if you haven't read it or if you're trying to put it into context. This is put out by essentially a writer who is legendary in the goth scene. I mean, this is supposed to be dark, spiritual, and that's not what we're getting here at all with the TV show.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on this, and I think Coach Marcus and I are on the same page. We've been directing messaging back and forth, and every time they take a liberty like they've done in episode 4 or 5, he's the first one to message me and say, hey, that was amazing. I like what they're doing here. It's giving me more context as a book reader. And I'm the same way. Now, we did not grow. I don't think Coach Marcus, now I don't want to speak for him, but I did not grow up in the goth scene. Now, Neil Gaiman was, I knew him as a graphic novel writer, and then also obviously some of his books here. But I was not introduced into American Gods until we knew that we were going to do this podcast, and he was the same manner. So I wonder if that's the reason why, because we were just introduced to this, we're more accepting of these types of liberties, whereas you and Jez have been fans of the books for years, and you keep this as almost like, I hate to say another word, gospel. Like you want it to stick to the word that's written down.
I just don't think there's anything spooky about this. Also, Coach Marcus's insane obsession with barbecue would indicate that he's probably not a goth. They just don't go together. No, I think you hit the nail on the head here, where we're kind of coming at it from different eras. But for me, I wanted a spook factor. I wanted this show to succeed where Taboo failed. Taboo had plenty of spook factor, but just didn't really move as a story. I feel like this moves as a story, but all the scariness of it is gone.
Well, Coach Marcus, thank you so much for writing in. We really appreciate it. Again, you can follow him at Coach Marcus on Twitter. That does it for this week. That's all the emails. Now, I did want to point out that we got a lot of comments. You touched a little bit about it in Coach Marcus's email about we get messages from people that apparently it seems as if they never have listened to the podcast whatsoever.
Yeah, I understand the podcast is anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour long, depending on which episodes you're listening to. 30 minutes for the confessional and roughly an hour, 45 minutes to an hour for the deep dive. I get that people might not listen to every minute of it. Maybe you're driving, having side conversations or whatever. This isn't a college lecture. I don't expect you to take notes. But the accusations we get are sometimes hilarious.
Yeah, I would love at the end of the season, if we were just to dedicate an episode, if you think this idea is good, write in, let us know. But just all the mean tweets, the mean comments, I'd like to do, kind of take just 15 minutes, and you and I and Big D will sit around, we'll just read them.
That email that we got from Greg wrote in and said basically like, I love your podcast and all, but if you compare American Gods to be the same caliber of show as Lost or Game of Thrones, I can no longer take you seriously. I can't take you seriously if you think comparing the best TV shows ever to American Gods is even reasonable. Westworld blows it away. That's all stuff we've said. And then what my favorite part is that he points out, watch The Leftovers if you want to see. Big D has the hugest boner for The Leftovers I've ever seen a man have over a TV show. So look, Greg, like, hear us out, man. We're not saying it's in the same echelon.
Yeah. I called you guys. I was like, is anyone listening to the podcast? No one knows what's truly. I think we have 3 listeners. You have Coach Marcus, you have Jez Bell, and you have Gillian, and that's it. That's all. That's the only people that listen to the show.
I think I'm gonna have to start typing up transcripts and posting those online to go. No, I'm not gonna do that.
Well, that concludes this week's episode of Shad on TV, American Gods Confessional. Please be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're everywhere, including Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. At Shad on TV is that handle. You can also search for us on Facebook. Just search for Shad on TV Podcast. Our website, where you can see all the American God Confessional emails, is shadontv.com. And the email, if you want to be part of the episode, like you just heard, our email address is hosts@shadontv.com. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by any of those, be sure to leave a 5-star review. It helps the podcast grow. You can also check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we review the best 80s and 90s movies from our childhood that you, the audience, vote for. You can check out all the information and vote for the movies over at chatthemovies.com. We just recorded 1989's Batman, which we thought was going to be a much better movie.
Terrible.
You know what isn't terrible, though? The Hulu documentary, Bill and Batman, or Bill and Bob Kane, Batman and Bill. Anyway, it's about Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Go check it out. It's by far one of the best documentaries that I've watched in a while, and really, really, really interesting, that whole story there. But it involves Batman and the legacy there of one family. So check that out. But Yeah. Go watch Batman 1989, then listen to the podcast, because I think that's going to generate a lot of hate mail for us. But watch the movie first. That's all we're saying. Watch the movie first. On behalf of my co-host, Gene Lyons, and Big D, who never wants to be part of this because he doesn't want to be spoiled, and he's over there watching The Leftovers, be sure to join us on Monday or Tuesday, for our deep dive episode on American Gods. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Take care. Good night, and hail the old gods.